He broke my ribs. She texted the wrong number. Mafia boss replied, I'm on my way. Sarah's chest heaved with shallow breaths as she curled into herself on the cold hardwood floor. Each inhale sent daggers of pain through her ribcage, the aftermath of Jake's brutal assault still fresh. The room spun around her, shadows stretching across the walls as evening descended. Her phone lay just out of reach, knocked away during the struggle. She dragged herself toward it, inch by excruciating inch, tears streaming down her face. The screen was cracked, like her, but still functional. Her trembling fingers left streaks of blood as she tried to type out a message to Ashley. Please help. They're coming back to finish what they started. The words blurred before her eyes as she hit send, her broken hand throbbing with each movement. It wasn't until after she pressed the button that she noticed the unfamiliar number at the top of the screen. Horror washed over her as she realized her mistake. This wasn't Ashley's number. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She'd just sent a desperate cry for help to a complete stranger. Her heart hammered against her bruised ribs as she stared at the screen, willing the message to unsend itself. The gentle buzz of her phone nearly made her drop it. The response was immediate, just 2 words that made her blood run cold. I'm on my way. The message sat there, stark and commanding. Sarah pushed herself up against the wall, ignoring the stabbing pain in her side. This was wrong. She'd meant to reach Ashley, not some stranger who could be anyone, could be worse than Jake. Her fingers shook as she tried to type out a response. Sorry, wrong number. But before she could hit send, another message appeared. What's your address? The directness of it startled her. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the keypad. Everything in her screamed not to answer, not to trust. She'd trusted Jake once, and look where that had gotten her. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now, back to the story. But Jake's words echoed in her head. I'll be back to finish this. She knew he meant it. She was trapped here, broken and alone. When the doorbell rang, Sarah's heart nearly stopped. A deep voice called out, somehow both commanding and gentle. Sarah? The sound of her name in that unfamiliar voice sent chills down her spine. How did he know her name? She hadn't given it. She struggled to remember if her full name was visible on her profile, cursing herself for not being more careful with her privacy settings. Part of her wanted to stay silent, to pretend no one was home. But something in that voice, the quiet authority, the hint of concern, stirred something inside her. A desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, this stranger could help her when everyone else had failed. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. Sarah, I need you to let me know you're... Okay. She stared at the door, her mind racing with possibilities. Who was this man? How had he found her so quickly, and why did she feel this inexplicable pull to trust him when everything she'd learned told her to run? Her phone buzzed again. I can help you, but you need to let me in. Sarah's fingers clutched the phone tighter, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The voice called out again, and this time she could hear the edge of worry in it, the underlying current of power that promised both danger and protection. She had a choice to make, and she had to make it now. Sarah's hand trembled on the doorknob. Through the peephole, she could make out a tall figure in what appeared to be an expensive black suit. The hallway light cast shadows across his features, but there was no mistaking the dangerous aura that radiated from him. Drawing in a painful breath, she unlocked the door. The man who stood before her made her breath catch. He filled the doorframe with his presence, broad shoulders perfectly tailored in that suit she'd glimpsed. But it was his eyes that captured her. Steel gray and penetrating, They took in every detail of her appearance with clinical precision. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as his gaze swept over her injuries. Sarah Matthews? His voice was deep, controlled, with an accent she couldn't quite place. Italian, maybe. She managed a small nod, wrapping her arms protectively around her middle. The movement made her wince, and something flickered in those steel eyes. Anger, perhaps, or concern. It was gone too quickly for her to be sure. I'm Luca Vieri. He didn't offer his hand, seeming to understand that any movement might startle her. Instead, he remained perfectly still, like a predator assessing its surroundings. You need medical attention. The name struck a chord in her memory. Whispered conversations she'd overheard at the cafe where she worked, news reports she'd glimpsed. Luca Vieri, the businessman whose empire stretched across the city. The one people spoke about in hushed tones, whose very name carried weight in both legitimate and darker circles. I'm fine, Sarah said automatically, but her voice cracked. She could taste copper in her mouth, remnants of split lip. Luca's expression hardened. You have at least 2 broken ribs, possibly more. His assessment was quick, professional. Your hand needs immediate attention, and that cut above your eye requires stitches. He stepped forward, and Sarah instinctively moved back. Pain shot through her side at the sudden movement, making her gasp. In an instant, Luca's arm was around her waist, supporting her weight. His touch was surprisingly gentle, despite the strength she could feel coiled in his frame. My car is downstairs, he said, his tone brooking no argument. I have a private medical facility waiting. Sarah stiffened in his hold. No hospitals, she whispered. Jake, he'll find me there. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Something dangerous flashed in Luca's eyes at the name. Jake, he repeated, the word like ice. The one who did this to you? She didn't answer, but her silence was confirmation enough. Luca's free hand clenched at his side, the only outward sign of his reaction. He won't find you, Luca said with quiet certainty. No one touches what's under my protection. The possessive tone in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. This man, this stranger who'd appeared in her life through a mistyped number, radiated both danger and safety in equal measure. I can't, Sarah protested weakly as he guided her toward the door. I don't even know you. You texted me for help, Luca reminded her, his voice softening slightly. Let me provide it. When she still hesitated, he sighed. Sarah, you need medical attention. You can either walk to my car, or I can carry you. Your choice. She tried to take a step forward, but her legs buckled. Without hesitation, Luca swept her into his arms, careful of her injuries. The movement brought her face close to his chest, and she caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely him. Put me down, she whispered, but there was no strength behind the words. Her body betrayed her, melting into his hold. Not happening, Piccola, he murmured, already striding toward the elevator. Sarah felt the fight drain out of her as the reality of her situation sank in. She'd accidentally reached out to one of the most powerful men in the city, and now she was in his arms, completely at his mercy. There would be no walking away from this, no pretending it never happened. She'd stepped into Luca Vieri's world, and something told her she wouldn't be leaving it anytime soon. The sleek black Mercedes glided through the empty streets, its powerful engine barely making a sound. Sarah sat curled in the passenger seat, her arms wrapped protectively around herself. The leather was butter soft beneath her, the car's interior speaking of wealth she'd never known. But the luxury did little to ease her racing thoughts. Streetlights cast intermittent shadows across Luca's face as he drove. His profile was sharp, aristocratic, his expression unreadable as his eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. Two black SUVs followed at a discreet distance, his security detail, she assumed. The sight of them in the rearview mirror only reinforced how far she'd stepped outside her normal world. "Why did he attack you?" Luca's voice broke the silence, deep and controlled. His question wasn't demanding, but there was an underlying steel that suggested he expected an answer. Sarah's fingers tightened on her arms. "It's complicated." The words felt inadequate even as she spoke them. "Jake, he doesn't like being told no." Luca's hands flexed on the steering wheel, the only indication that her words affected him. "Your ex-boyfriend?" "Yes." The admission came, out barely above a whisper. "I ended things 3 months ago. He didn't take it well." The car slowed as they approached a red light. In the momentary stillness, Sarah could feel Luca's gaze on her, assessing. She kept her eyes forward, afraid of what she might see in those steel-gray depths. "He's done this before." It wasn't a question. Sarah's silence was answer enough. The light turned green, and the car moved forward smoothly. They were leaving the city proper now, heading into the wealthy suburbs where houses grew larger and further apart. "You didn't go to the police?" Again, not a question. A bitter laugh escaped her before she could stop it. "Jake has friends in the department. The last time I tried." She trailed off, remembering the dismissive looks, the not-so-subtle suggestions that she was overreacting. "It didn't help." Something dark passed over Luca's expression, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. The car turned onto a private road, trees rising up on either side like sentinels. "Where are we?" Sarah asked, tension creeping into her voice. This wasn't the way to any hospital she knew. "My home," Luca replied simply. "I have a private medical staff on call. You'll be safer here." Before Sarah could protest, the trees opened up to reveal the mansion. The word seemed inadequate for what rose before them, a sprawling stone edifice that looked more like a medieval fortress than a home. Warm lights glowed from dozens of windows, but the overall effect was more intimidating than welcoming. The car pulled up to a circular drive, where two men in dark suits immediately appeared. They opened the car doors with practiced efficiency, but Sarah hesitated to move. Every breath sent pain shooting through her ribs, and the thought of walking seemed impossible. Luca was already around the car, dismissing his men with a subtle gesture. "Allow me," he said, his voice gentler than she'd heard it yet. Without waiting for her response, he lifted her from the seat as carefully as he had at her apartment. Sarah wanted to protest, to insist she could walk, but her body betrayed her by sinking into his hold. Up close, she could feel the strength in his arms, smell the subtle cologne that clung to his suit. It should have frightened her, being so close to such a dangerous man. Instead, she felt an inexplicable sense of security. The massive wooden doors swung open as they approached, revealing an interior that matched the exterior's grandeur. Marble floors stretched out before them, a sweeping staircase dominated the foyer, and everywhere she looked spoke of old money and power. This was Luca's world, beautiful, dangerous, and completely foreign to everything she knew. As he carried her across the threshold, Sarah's heart raced with the realization that she'd crossed more than just a physical boundary. She'd stepped into Luca Vieri's domain, and something told her this was only the beginning. The mahogany doors opened to reveal a guest suite larger than Sarah's entire apartment. Cream-colored walls, elegant furniture, and a massive four-poster bed spoke of luxury she'd only seen in magazines. Her bare feet sank into plush carpeting as Luca carried her inside, his movements careful to avoid jostling her injuries. "The doctor will be here in 10 minutes, he said, his voice low and controlled as he set her on the edge of the bed. "Do you need anything for the pain?" Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, fighting a shiver despite the room's warmth. "I'm fine." The words came out automatically, a habit born from years of making herself small, undemanding. Luca's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're not fine." He shrugged off his suit jacket, draping it over her shoulders. The fabric was warm from his body, carrying that subtle cologne that made her head swim. "You have at least 2 broken ribs, possibly more." A knock at the door interrupted them. A maid entered with a tray of water and what looked like prescription medication. Luca took the tray, dismissing the woman with a slight nod. "Take these," he said, holding out 2 pills and a glass of water. "They'll help with the pain until the doctor arrives." Sarah hesitated, eyeing the pills warily. Luca seemed to read her thoughts. "They're sealed prescription painkillers," he said, his tone gentler than before. "I wouldn't harm you, Sarah. Not after—" He paused, something dark flickering in his eyes. "Not after what you've already been through." Her hands trembled as she took the pills, but she swallowed them without further argument. The water felt good against her dry throat, and she hadn't realized how thirsty she'd been until the first sip. Luca pulled an armchair closer to the bed, his movements precise and controlled. He sat down, his posture relaxed but alert, like a predator at rest. "The doctor who's coming specializes in treating trauma. She's discreet and very good at what she does." "Why are you doing this?" Sarah finally asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since he'd first appeared at her door. "You don't know me. I'm nobody to you." Something flickered across his face, too quick to read. "Let's say I have a personal interest in helping people in your situation." He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. "My sister, Olivia. She was in a similar position once. I wasn't there to protect her then." Before Sarah could process this revelation, another knock announced the doctor's arrival. Dr. Elena Martinez was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and efficient hands. She moved with purpose, setting down her medical bag and approaching Sarah with a warm smile. "Mr. Vieri, if you could step out while I examine the patient," she suggested, but Luca didn't move. "I'm staying," he said simply, his tone brooking no argument. He did, however, turn his chair to face away, giving Sarah what privacy he could while remaining in the room. The examination was thorough but gentle. Dr. Martinez's hands were warm as she checked Sarah's ribs, documented her bruises, and cleaned the cuts on her face. 3 broken ribs, she confirmed finally, and severe bruising, but thankfully no internal bleeding. The hand will need an X-ray tomorrow, but I can splint it for now." Throughout the examination, Sarah kept finding her gaze drawn to Luca's back. He sat perfectly still, his shoulders tense, as if ready to spring into action at any moment. Even with his back turned, his presence filled the room, making it impossible to forget whose house she was in. After Dr. Martinez finished bandaging her ribs and splinting her hand, she left detailed instructions for pain management and rest. As the door closed behind her, Luca turned his chair back around, his eyes immediately finding Sarah's. "I'll stay here tonight," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't up for discussion. "Try to get some rest." Sarah sank back against the pillows, too exhausted to argue. The painkillers were starting to take effect, making the edges of her world softer. Through heavy lids, she watched Luca settle more comfortably in his chair, his gaze never leaving her. There was something in his eyes she couldn't quite understand. Not pity, but something deeper, more complicated. Sunlight filtered through heavy curtains, casting soft shadows across the luxurious guest room. Sarah stirred, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous night came rushing back as pain shot through her ribs. She winced, trying to sit up. "Easy." Luca's deep voice came from the corner. He was still there, just as he'd promised, though he'd changed into a fresh white shirt and dark slacks. His jacket was draped over the back of his chair, and despite having stayed up all night, he looked impossibly put together. "Have you been here the whole time?" Sarah asked, her voice scratchy from sleep. "Yes." He stood, crossing the room with fluid grace to pour her a glass of water. "The doctor will be here in an hour for your x-ray." Sarah accepted the water, careful not to let their fingers touch. "You don't have to stay. I'm sure you have more important things to do than babysit me." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "My schedule is clear." He returned to his chair, loosening his collar slightly. "How's the pain?" "Manageable," she lied, but her attempt to shift positions betrayed her. The sharp intake of breath had Luca reaching for the pain medication before she could protest. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said quietly, holding out 2 pills. "I know what it's like to watch someone suffer through this kind of pain. Taking medication isn't weakness, Sarah." Something in his tone made her look up. His eyes held a distant pain, as if remembering something he'd rather forget. She took the pills without argument this time. A maid appeared with breakfast, fresh fruit, toast, and coffee. The smell made Sarah's stomach growl, reminding her she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Luca helped arrange the tray across her lap, his movements careful not to jostle her injuries. "You need to eat," he said, pouring coffee into a delicate china cup. "The medication shouldn't be taken on an empty stomach." Sarah picked at a piece of toast, watching as Luca moved to stand by the window. Sunlight caught his profile, highlighting the sharp angles of his face. Despite his dangerous reputation, there was something almost gentle in the way he'd cared for her through the night. "Why did you really help me?" she asked finally. "The truth this time." Luca was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something outside. When he turned back to her, his expression had softened slightly. "My sister, Olivia," he began, moving back to his chair. 3 years ago, she was involved with someone who... His jaw clenched. He hurt her. Badly. I was too focused on business, didn't see the signs until it was almost too late. Sarah's heart squeezed. She recognized the self-blame in his voice, the weight of responsibility he carried. When I finally found her, he continued, his voice dropping lower, she was in worse shape than you. Multiple broken bones, internal bleeding. The bastard had left her for dead. His hands, resting on his knees, curled into fists. I wasn't there to protect her then, but I made sure he never touched another woman again. The implication hung heavy in the air. Sarah didn't need to ask what had happened to the man. She's better now, Luca added, his expression softening slightly. Stronger. But when I saw your message last night, saw you, he met her eyes. I couldn't walk away. Not again. Sarah found herself reaching out, touching his hand before she could think better of it. His skin was warm, and she felt him freeze at the contact. Thank you, she whispered, meaning it for the first time since he'd appeared at her door. His fingers curled around hers, gentle despite their strength. For a moment they sat in silence, connected by shared understanding of pain and survival. In his eyes, Sarah saw not the cold mafia boss who struck fear into his enemies, but a brother who had failed to protect his sister once and vowed never to let it happen again. Sarah's fingers traced the edge of the silk curtains, watching from the second-floor window as Luca paced the garden below. His phone was pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing sharply as he spoke. Even from this distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched between sentences. She'd been at the mansion for 3 days now, and this had become her morning ritual, observing him from afar, trying to understand the complexities of the man who'd saved her. The garden was his sanctuary, she'd noticed. He always took his important calls there, away from prying eyes. "Coffee, Miss Matthews?" Sarah startled at Maria's voice. The elderly housekeeper stood in the doorway with a steaming cup on a silver tray. "Thank you," Sarah said, accepting the cup. She couldn't help but notice how the staff treated her, with a mixture of curiosity and careful respect. Whatever Luca had told them about her presence here, it was clear they considered her important. Below, Luca ended his call, running a hand through his dark hair. When he looked up, his eyes met hers through the window. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. There was something magnetic about him, something that pulled at her despite her best efforts to maintain distance. He gave her a slight nod before disappearing into the house. Sarah's heart quickened at the sound of footsteps in the hallway minutes later, but they passed her door without stopping. She released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The attraction was there, undeniable and growing stronger each day. She saw it in the way his eyes followed her movements, felt it in the electricity that crackled between them when they shared space. But Sarah knew better than to act on it. Men like Luca, powerful, dangerous men, they didn't offer safety. They offered storm clouds wrapped in silk sheets. She wandered the halls of the mansion, her ribs still tender but healing. The doctor had been pleased with her progress yesterday, though Luca had insisted she stay longer. "Until we're sure you're safe," he'd said, his tone booking no argument. The house was a maze of luxury. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, priceless art. But it was the smaller details that caught her attention. The worn leather of Luca's favorite armchair, the dog-eared books in his study, the family photos scattered among the grandeur. She paused in front of one such photo, tucked away in an alcove. It showed Luca and a young woman who had to be Olivia. They were at what looked like a graduation ceremony, Olivia in a cap and gown, Luca standing beside her. But it was his expression that made Sarah's heart squeeze. He was looking at his sister with such tenderness, such fierce pride and love. His usual mask of cold control was completely absent, replaced by a warm smile that transformed his entire face. One arm was wrapped protectively around Olivia's shoulders, and even in the photograph, Sarah could see how he angled his body slightly in front of hers, a shield against the world. This was the real Luca, she realized. Not just the ruthless mafia boss who commanded fear and respect, but a brother who would move heaven and earth to protect those he loved. A man who had witnessed his sister's pain and emerged with an unshakable determination to prevent it from happening again. Sarah touched the frame gently. The vulnerability in that captured moment made her chest ache. She understood now why he'd helped her that night, why he continued to watch over her with such intensity. He wasn't just offering protection. He was trying to right a past wrong, to save someone else from the fate his sister had narrowly escaped. The sound of footsteps made her drop her hand quickly, but she didn't turn around. She knew it was him. She'd learned to recognize his presence, the way the air seemed to charge with electricity when he was near. Luca appeared in the doorway of Sarah's room just as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the polished floors. He'd changed from his usual dark suit into a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. It was a softer look, but no less intimidating. "Have dinner with me," he said. It wasn't quite a question, but his tone held none of the usual command she'd grown accustomed to hearing. Sarah's fingers fidgeted with the hem of her borrowed sweater. "I don't think, please." The word seemed to cost him something. "You've been here 3 days, and we've barely spoken." She studied him, noting the slight tension in his jaw, the way his hand rested casually against the doorframe. Everything about him was carefully controlled, yet there was something almost vulnerable in the request. "Okay," she said finally. "Just dinner." His lips curved slightly. Just dinner. The dining room was overwhelming in its grandeur. A massive crystal chandelier hung above a table that could easily seat 20, though only 2 places had been set, one at the head and one to the right. The silverware gleamed in the soft lighting, and fresh flowers filled crystal vases. "This is—" Sarah trailed off, taking in the ornate moldings and silk wallpaper. "Too much?" Luca pulled out her chair, his presence warm behind her. "A little." She settled into the plush seat, trying not to feel completely out of place in her borrowed clothes. He took his seat at the head of the table, close enough that she could catch the subtle scent of his cologne. "I thought about having us eat in the kitchen, but Maria would never forgive me. She's very particular about proper dining etiquette." The mention of his housekeeper made Sarah smile despite herself. The older woman had been fussing over her since she arrived, bringing her tea and extra blankets without being asked. The first course arrived, a delicate soup that smelled divine. Sarah watched as Luca picked up his spoon, his movements precise and elegant. Everything about him spoke of power and control, from the way he held himself to how he handled the silverware. "Your ribs," he said after a moment. "How are they feeling?" "Better." She took a careful sip of the soup. "The doctor says I'm healing well." "Good." His eyes met hers over the rim of his wineglass. "And the nightmares?" Sarah's spoon clattered against the bowl. She hadn't realized he knew about those. "How did you—" "My room is down the hall," he said simply. "I hear you sometimes at night." Heat crept up her neck. "I'm sorry if I've been disturbing you." "Don't apologize." His voice was firm. Never apologize for surviving. The main course arrived, perfectly cooked steak with roasted vegetables. Sarah cut into the meat, aware of how Luca watched her every movement. The silence between them felt heavy with unspoken words. "Why are you doing all this?" she finally asked. "The protection, the doctor, this dinner." "I'm nobody to you." Luca set down his knife, his expression unreadable. "You're not nobody, Sarah. You're—" A sharp knock at the door cut him off. Sarah watched as his entire demeanor shifted, the softer version of him disappearing behind a mask of cold authority. One of his men stood in the doorway, face grim. "Boss," the man said, "we need you. Now." Luca's jaw tightened. He placed his napkin on the table and stood. "Excuse me," he said to Sarah, his voice carrying none of the warmth from moments before. Without another word, he stepped out into the hallway, closing the door behind him. Sarah sat alone at the massive table, her appetite gone. The chandelier sparkled overhead, each crystal catching the light like a tear. She could hear the low murmur of voices from the hallway, though the words were indistinct. Her finger traced the rim of her wineglass as she realized just how deep she'd fallen into Luca's world, a world where dinner could be interrupted by what she could only assume was business of the dangerous kind. The cool night air wrapped around Sarah like a silk scarf as she wandered through the mansion's manicured gardens. The dinner's abrupt ending had left her restless, and the perfectly trimmed hedges offered a peaceful escape from the opulent walls that seemed to close in on her with each passing hour. Moonlight silvered the fountain's spray, creating dancing shadows across the stone pathways. Her borrowed sweater provided little warmth against the evening chill, but she welcomed the bite of cold air. It helped clear her head, washing away the lingering scent of Luca's cologne and the memory of his intense gaze across the dinner table. The sound of her footsteps on the gravel path mingled with the gentle splash of water and the rustle of leaves. Here, away from the mansion's watchful windows, she could almost pretend she was somewhere normal, somewhere safe. Almost. "Beautiful evening for a walk, isn't it?" Sarah startled at the smooth voice behind her. A man emerged from the shadows cast by a row of cypress trees, his smile pleasant, but something predatory lurking in his eyes. He was well dressed in an expensive suit, his silver hair perfectly styled. "I'm Viktor Romanov," he said, extending a hand she didn't take. "I have business with Luca, but I must say, finding you out here is an unexpected pleasure." Sarah's heart hammered against her still healing ribs. She took a step back, maintaining distance between them. "I should head back inside." "Please, don't let me frighten you away." He produced a flask from his jacket pocket, the metal gleaming in the moonlight. "Share a drink with me? The night is young, and I'd love to hear how a beautiful woman like yourself came to be in Luca's care." Every instinct screamed danger, but Sarah forced herself to remain calm. She'd learned the hard way that showing fear only encouraged predators. "Thank you, but I don't drink with strangers." Romanov's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "We're hardly strangers now, are we? I introduced myself, and you're—" He took a step closer. "Sarah Matthews. Yes, I know all about you." The way he said her name made her skin crawl. Sarah's fingers curled into fists, her body tensing for flight. The mansion seemed miles away now, though she knew it was just beyond the hedges. "Come now," Romanov continued, uncapping the flask. "Just one drink. We can discuss your situation. Perhaps I could offer you better accommodations than what Luca provides. Somewhere more comfortable, more secure." Before Sarah could respond, a shadow detached itself from the darkness. Luca materialized like an avenging angel, his presence electric in the night air. His face was carved from stone, but his eyes blazed with barely contained fury. "Romanov." Luca's voice was deadly quiet. "You're trespassing." The older man's pleasant facade didn't slip, but he lowered the flask. "Ah, Luca, I was just introducing myself to your lovely guest." "Leave." The single word carried the weight of a death sentence. Romanov's smile turned sharp. "No need for hostility. I was merely being neighborly." He turned to Sarah, offering a slight bow. "Perhaps we'll continue our conversation another time, my dear." "There won't be another time," Luca said, stepping between them. "Get out." Sarah watched as Romanov retreated into the shadows, his soft chuckle lingering in the air like poison. The tension in Luca's shoulders remained, his hands clenched at his sides. When he finally turned to face her, the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentler now, but still rough with anger. Sarah nodded, unable to look away from him. The moonlight carved shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw, the darkness in his eyes. She should have been frightened by the violence she'd glimpsed in him, but instead, she felt oddly safe. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, moving closer. His presence surrounded her, warm and solid in the cool night air. Sarah sat in the mansion's library, nestled in a plush leather armchair with a book she wasn't really reading. The warm glow of table lamps cast dancing shadows across ancient wooden shelves, making the room feel both cozy and imposing. After a week in Luca's care, she'd found this sanctuary, a place where she could pretend her life hadn't become entangled with one of the city's most dangerous men. The sharp ring of the mansion's landline pierced the quiet. Sarah jumped, her book tumbling to the floor. Before she could reach for it, Maria, one of the house staff, appeared in the doorway. "Miss Matthews, there's a call for you." Sarah frowned. Nobody knew she was here. "For me?" Maria nodded, holding out a cordless phone. Her expression was carefully neutral, but something in her eyes made Sarah's stomach tighten. Taking the phone, Sarah pressed it to her ear. "Hello?" "Ah, Sarah." The voice was smooth as aged whiskey, familiar in a way that made her skin crawl. "I'm delighted to finally speak with you properly after our brief encounter in the garden." Viktor Romanov. Sarah's fingers tightened around the phone. Through the library's open door, she saw Luca emerge from his office, his expression darkening as he noticed her on the phone. "What do you want?" Sarah kept her voice steady, even as Luca strode toward her, his presence filling the room. "I'm hosting a charity gala this Saturday at the Grand Hotel," Romanov said, his tone pleasant but calculated. "I'd be honored if you would attend as my special guest. The city's finest will be there. It would be an excellent opportunity for you to expand your social circle." Luca reached for the phone, but Sarah turned away slightly, holding up a hand. His jaw tightened, but he didn't grab it from her. "I appreciate the invitation," Sarah said carefully, "but I'm afraid I'll have to decline." Romanov's laugh was soft, dangerous. "Come now, surely Luca doesn't keep you locked up in that fortress of his. Or perhaps he's afraid to let you out." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "My decisions are my own." "Of course they are." The condescension in his voice made her bristle. "Which is why I'm inviting you, not him. Though, naturally, Luca is welcome to attend, as your escort, if he wishes." Luca's eyes never left her face as she spoke, his expression growing darker with each passing moment. The tension radiating from him was almost tangible. "I'll send a car for you at 8, Romanov continued, not waiting for her response. "And Sarah, wear something red. It's my favorite color." Before she could reply, Luca plucked the phone from her hand. "Romanov," his voice was ice. "If you want to discuss business, call my office. Stay away from Sarah." Sarah couldn't hear Romanov's response, but whatever he said made Luca's free hand clench into a fist. "We'll be there," Luca ground out, then ended the call. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stared at him, surprised by his acceptance of the invitation. "We will?" Luca's expression was unreadable as he set the phone down. "Yes." "But you just said, 'sometimes,'" he cut her off. "The best way to protect something is to keep it close." His eyes met hers, intense and possessive. "Romanov is playing a game, and I won't let him use you as a pawn." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine, not entirely from fear. "And what if I don't want to go?" Luca stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Then say the word and we won't. But know this, Romanov won't stop. He's like a shark that scented blood in the water. At least this way, I can keep you safe." The heat from his body seemed to wrap around her, and Sarah found herself struggling to think clearly. This was more than just protection. She could see it in the way his eyes darkened when he looked at her, feel it in the charged air between them. She was being pulled deeper into their world of power plays and dangerous games, and the most frightening part was that she wasn't sure she wanted to resist. Sarah sat in the mansion's sunlit conservatory, watching as Olivia Vieri carefully tended to her collection of orchids. The younger woman moved with a grace that seemed at odds with the darkness that surrounded her family name. Afternoon light streamed through the glass panels, casting warm shadows across the marble floors. "These need special care," Olivia explained, misting the delicate flowers. "Too much attention can kill them just as easily as neglect." Her hands trembled slightly as she set down the spray bottle, a brief flash of vulnerability crossing her features. Sarah noticed the faint scar on Olivia's wrist as she reached for another plant. It was thin, silvery, the kind of mark that told stories of survival. "Luca built this place for me," Olivia said softly, gesturing to the greenhouse around them. After he got me out." She turned to face Sarah, her eyes carrying a weight that seemed too heavy for someone so young. "I suppose he told you about what happened?" "Only bits and pieces," Sarah admitted, shifting in her comfortable wicker chair. Olivia settled into the chair opposite her, hands clasped in her lap. "His name was Marcus. He was charming at first. They always are, aren't they?" Her smile was bitter. "I thought I'd found someone who truly loved me. Instead, I found myself trapped in a nightmare." Sarah's chest tightened, memories of her own past threatening to surface. "How did you get out?" "Luca," Olivia said simply. "Marcus had isolated me completely. No phone, no friends, no contact with family. But Luca," she paused, collecting herself. "He never stopped looking for me. When he finally found me, I was barely alive. Marcus had—" Her voice cracked. "Let's just say Luca made sure he'd never hurt another woman again." The implication hung heavy in the air. Sarah thought of Luca's cold eyes, his carefully controlled violence, and for the first time, she understood it wasn't just cruelty that drove him. "He blamed himself for not protecting me sooner," Olivia continued, reaching for a cup of tea that had gone cold. "That's why he's so intense about protection now, especially with you." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "With me?" Olivia's knowing smile was gentle. "I see the way he looks at you, Sarah. The way he hovers when you're in the room. How his voice changes when he says your name. I haven't seen him like this since, ever." "He's just being protective because of what happened to me," Sarah protested. But the words felt hollow even to her own ears. "Is that what you tell yourself?" Olivia reached across and touched Sarah's hand. "My brother is many things. Dangerous, ruthless, controlling. But he's also
capable of incredible tenderness. I've seen it. The way he built this sanctuary for me, how he checks on me every single day, no matter what crisis he's handling." Sarah thought about the quiet moments she'd witnessed, Luca's gentle hands when he helped her with her injuries, the soft look in his eyes when he thought she was sleeping. "He's not just the cold-hearted killer everyone thinks he is," Olivia said. "That's his armor. His way of protecting what matters to him. And Sarah?" She squeezed Sarah's hand. "You matter to him." The words settled in Sarah's chest like a weight, both thrilling and terrifying. She thought of Luca's intensity, the electricity that sparked between them whenever they were close, the way he made her feel both completely safe and utterly dangerous at the same time. "I don't know if I'm ready for what that means," Sarah whispered. "Nobody ever is," Olivia replied with a sad smile. "Love in our world isn't simple. It's messy and complicated, and sometimes it hurts. But when it's real," she touched the scar on her wrist, It can also save you. Sarah sat back, her mind whirling with conflicting emotions. The attraction she felt toward Luca was undeniable, a magnetic pull she couldn't ignore. But the darkness that surrounded him, the violence that seemed to follow in his wake. Could she really let herself fall for someone like that? Sarah stared at the invitation in her hands, the heavy cream cardstock embossed with gold lettering that caught the afternoon light. Viktor Romanov's annual winter gala, the most exclusive event in the city's social calendar. You're not going. Luca's voice was steel, cutting through the silence of his study. He stood by the window, shoulders rigid with tension. I already accepted, Sarah said, lifting her chin. The bruises had faded, but her ribs still ached when she took deep breaths. I can't hide in your mansion forever, Luca. His jaw clenched. Romanov is dangerous. So are you, she countered softly. The look he gave her was dark, possessive. That's different. Sarah smoothed down her midnight blue gown, a designer piece that had appeared mysteriously in her closet that morning. I need to do this. For myself. Hours later, Sarah stepped into the grand ballroom of the Romanov estate. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across marble floors, and the air was thick with perfume and power. Women dripped diamonds, men wore perfectly tailored suits, but their eyes were sharp as knives. Luca walked beside her, his hand hovering at the small of her back. He'd insisted on accompanying her, though his entire body radiated barely contained violence. In his black tuxedo, he looked devastating, and devastatingly dangerous. Sarah, darling. Viktor Romanov materialized before them, champagne in hand. His smile was practiced perfection, but his eyes were cold. You look absolutely breathtaking. Sarah felt Luca tense beside her. Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Romanov. Please, call me Victor. He extended his hand, and Sarah had no choice but to take it. His grip was soft, almost feminine, but there was nothing gentle about the way he looked at her. I must steal you for a dance. I don't think, Luca started, but Sarah cut him off. One dance, she said firmly. She needed to show both men she wasn't a puppet to be controlled. Victor led her to the dance floor, his hand settling at her waist. The orchestra played something slow and melancholic. You're wasted on him, you know, Victor murmured, too close to her ear. Vieri is all brute force and violence. No finesse. Sarah maintained her polite smile, though her skin crawled. I wasn't aware I belonged to anyone. Ah, but you could. His fingers tightened slightly. I could give you everything, Sarah. Safety, luxury, freedom from his suffocating protection. No blood on your hands, no bodies in your wake. You think your hands are any cleaner? The words slipped out before she could stop them. Victor's laugh was soft and dangerous. I like you, Sarah. You have spirit. He spun her slowly, deliberately moving them away from where Luca stood watching. But you should know. What Vieri touches, he destroys. Look at his sister. Sarah's blood ran cold. Don't talk about Olivia. He failed to protect her once. What makes you think he won't fail you, too? Victor's voice was honey-sweet poison. I can offer you so much more. Before Sarah could respond, a hand clamped down on Victor's shoulder. Luca stood there, his expression murderous. The dance is over. Victor's smile never wavered. We were just getting acquainted. Touch her again, Luca said softly, terribly. And I'll remove your hands myself. The air crackled with tension. Other dancers moved away, sensing the danger. Sarah stood between them, heart racing, as two of the most dangerous men in the city sized each other up. Such violence, Victor tisked,
Is this really the world you want, Sarah? Blood and brutality? His eyes gleamed. I could show you a different path. Sarah felt the weight of their gazes, Victor's calculated charm, Luca's barely contained rage. She was a pawn in their game, yet somehow also the prize. The realization made her stomach turn. The orchestra continued to play, the music a stark contrast to the deadly tension surrounding them. Sarah had wanted control, but now she realized she'd walked right into the middle of a power struggle that had been brewing long before she entered their world. Sarah's heels clicked against the marble floor as she made her way through the mansion's winding corridors. The party's sounds grew distant, replaced by the thundering of her heart. She needed air, space to think, to process the dangerous game she'd stumbled into. Leaving so soon? Victor's voice sliced through the silence. She turned to find him blocking her path, his sophisticated charm replaced by something darker. The corridor suddenly felt narrower, the walls closing in. I'm not feeling well, Sarah said, taking a step back. I should find Luca. Always Luca. Victor moved closer, herding her toward a door. You don't need his permission for everything, Sarah. Before she could react, he had her backed into what appeared to be his private study. Dark wood paneling and leather-bound books surrounded them. The door clicked shut behind him. Mr. Romanov. Victor, he corrected, his voice silk over steel. We're past formalities, don't you think? He advanced, forcing her to retreat until her back hit his desk. I've watched you these past weeks, hiding in Vieri's fortress. You're like a bird in a gilded cage. Sarah's fingers curled around the edge of the desk. Her ribs might still be tender, but her spirit wasn't broken. I'm not hiding, and I'm certainly not trapped. No? He reached out, touching a strand of her hair. Then why do you flinch when he comes near? Why do those beautiful eyes dart around looking for escape routes? His hand moved to her face. I could free you from him. Sarah jerked away. Don't touch me. Such fire, Victor murmured, wasted on a brute like Vieri. He pressed closer, trapping her against the desk. He'll snuff out that spark, you know. Turn you into another broken toy, like his sister. The mention of Olivia sparked something in Sarah. Her hand shot up, shoving hard against his chest. I said, don't touch me. Victor stumbled back, surprise flickering across his face before it hardened into something ugly. Playing hard to get? How charming. He lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. But Sarah wasn't the same woman who'd let herself be victimized before. She twisted, breaking his grip the way Luca had taught her. Her knee came up, catching him in the stomach. Victor doubled over, cursing. You little bitch, he snarled, all pretense of sophistication gone. Sarah tried to dart past him, but he recovered quickly, blocking her path. His hand shot out, catching her throat. I tried to be gentle, he hissed, to give you a choice. The door exploded inward with a crash that shook the walls. Luca stood in the doorway, his presence filling the room like a gathering storm. His eyes took in the scene, Victor's hand on Sarah's throat, her defensive stance, and something deadly flickered in their depths. Let her go. Each word dripped with lethal promise. Victor's hand fell away. He stepped back, smoothing his jacket with affected casualness. We were just having a chat. A chat? Luca's voice was terrifyingly soft. He hadn't moved from the doorway, but the air crackled with violence. Touch her again, and I'll show you what a real conversation feels like. Such dramatics. Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. I was merely offering Sarah options.
A chance at a life without violence.
By assaulting her? Luka's laugh was cold. You're pathetic, Romanov.
Sarah felt the tension building, knew she had to diffuse it before blood stained the expensive carpets. She moved toward Luka, and his arm
immediately curved around her waist, pulling her close. This isn't over, Victor called as they turned to leave. Luka paused, looking back over his shoulder.
You're right. It isn't. His voice dropped to a whisper that carried death in its wake. But when it is, you'll wish you'd never laid eyes on what's mine. They walked through the corridors in silence, Luka's arm still firmly around her waist. His touch wasn't confining, it was protective, possessive in a way that made her feel oddly safe. When they reached his car, he finally looked at her, his eyes softening slightly. Are you hurt? Sarah shook her head. I handled it. Yes, he said, and there was pride mixed with his anger now. You did. Sarah stormed through the mansion's grand entrance, her heels clicking against the marble floors. The night's events had pushed her past her breaking point. Luka followed close behind, his presence a looming shadow she couldn't shake. Don't walk away from me, he commanded, his voice tight with controlled anger. She whirled around, her hands clenched into fists. Or what? You'll lock me up like some prized possession? Like every other man who thought they could own me? The words hit their mark. Luka's jaw tightened, a muscle ticking beneath his skin. Is that what you think this is? What else should I think? Sarah's voice cracked with emotion. You parade me around like I'm yours, make decisions for me, fight my battles. I protect what's mine, he cut in, taking a step closer. I'm not yours! The words echoed through the empty foyer. I'm not anyone's. I've spent years rebuilding myself after men who thought they could claim me, control me, break me. I am nothing like them. Luka's voice dropped dangerously low. Really? Sarah laughed bitterly. Tonight, you practically marked your territory in front of Romanov, like I'm some prize to be fought over. Luka moved suddenly, backing her against the wall. His hands planted on either side of her head, caging her in without touching her. His eyes, usually cold and controlled, blazed with something dark and powerful. You think I'm like the men who hurt you? His voice was rough. The ones who broke your bones and crushed your spirit? He leaned closer, his breath fanning across her face. I've killed men for less than what they did to you. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest, but she held his gaze. That's exactly my point. You think violence is the answer to everything, that possession equals protection. No, Luka growled. I think you're worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth killing for. I don't need... You handled yourself tonight, he interrupted. I saw it. You're stronger than you know. His expression darkened. But this isn't just about protection anymore, Sarah. She swallowed hard. Then what is it about? I'm done pretending. His hand moved to her face, not quite touching. Done trying to shield you from what I am. I'm a ruthless man. I take what I want, and I destroy anyone who threatens what's mine. His thumb finally brushed her cheek. But I've never wanted anyone the way I want you. The touch sent electricity through her body. Luka, you want to know the difference between me and the men who hurt you? His voice dropped to a whisper. They wanted to break you. I want to watch you rise. To stand beside me, not beneath me. Sarah's breath caught. The raw honesty in his words stripped away her defenses. "And if I don't want to be part of your world?" "Then walk away." He stepped back, creating space between them. "But know that if you stay, I won't hold back anymore. No more gentle handling. No more pretending I don't want to claim every inch of you." The air crackled between them. Sarah felt the weight of the moment, the choice laid bare before her. Everything in her past screamed to run, to protect herself from another man who could hurt her. But Luca wasn't like the others. He'd never raised a hand to her, never tried to diminish her strength. Even now, he was giving her a choice. "Your world is dangerous," she whispered. "Yes." "And you're a dangerous man." His eyes darkened. "The most dangerous." Sarah reached out, her fingers touching his chest, feeling his heart thundering beneath the expensive suit. The attraction between them was undeniable, a living thing that had grown stronger with each passing day. "I should leave," she said softly. "But you won't." It wasn't a question. Looking into his eyes, Sarah saw everything he was offering: protection, passion, power. But more than that, she saw acceptance. He didn't want to change her or break her. He wanted her exactly as she was. "No," she admitted. "I won't." The library's heavy silence pressed around them, broken only by the crackling of the fireplace. Sarah stood by the tall windows, watching raindrops trace patterns on the glass. Behind her, Luca paced like a caged animal, his reflection a dark shadow in the window. "You can't keep doing this," she said finally, turning to face him. "You can't shield me from everything." "I can try." His voice was rough, tension radiating from his broad shoulders. The flames cast dancing shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw, the intensity in his eyes. Sarah's breath caught as he moved closer, his presence filling the space between them. "You're suffocating me," she whispered, but there was less conviction in her voice than before. "Ever since the gala, you've doubled the security, restricted my movements." "Romanov is still out there." Luca's hands clenched at his sides. "He won't stop until—" "Until what? Until you lock me away completely?" Sarah stepped closer, challenging him. "I won't live like that, Luca. I won't be a prisoner again, not even in a gilded cage." His eyes darkened at her words. "You think that's what this is? That I want to imprison you?" "I think you're scared," she shot back. "Scared of feeling something, of letting anyone close enough to
matter." Luca moved suddenly, closing the distance between them. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Sarah tilted her chin up, refusing to back down. "I see the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. The way your hands twitch to touch me, but you hold back. You're terrified of wanting something you can't control." "Stop," he growled, but she could see she'd hit a nerve. "Make me." The words slipped out before she could stop them, a challenge that hung in the air between them. The library seemed to hold its breath. Luca's eyes dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. The tension between them was a living thing, electric and dangerous. "You're playing with fire, Sarah." His voice was low, warning. "Maybe I want to burn." She pressed her hand to his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palm. "Maybe I'm tired of both of us pretending this isn't exactly where we're meant to be." Something snapped in Luca's expression. His hand tangled in her hair, pulling her head back as his mouth crashed down on hers. The kiss was fierce, desperate,
years of restraint shattering in an instant. Sarah gasped against his lips, her hands clutching his shirt. He tasted like expensive whiskey and danger, his tongue sweeping into her mouth with desperate hunger. She met his passion with her own, pushing up on her toes to get closer. Luca's free hand gripped her waist, pulling her flush against him. The hard planes of his body pressed against her softness, making her whimper. He swallowed the sound, deepening the kiss until she could barely breathe. The world narrowed to just this, his mouth on hers, his hands holding her like she might disappear, the heat building between them until it threatened to consume them both. Sarah's fingers slid into his hair, pulling slightly, and he growled against her lips. Time lost all meaning. They could have been kissing for seconds or hours, lost in the taste and feel of each other. Every brush of his tongue, every squeeze of his hands felt like he was marking her, claiming her. But then, as suddenly as it began, Luca wrenched himself away. His chest heaved as he stared at her, his usually perfect hair mussed from her fingers. Something vulnerable flickered in his eyes, something that looked almost like fear. Sarah's lips tingled from his kiss, her body aching for more. She watched as different emotions warred across his face, desire, confusion, and something deeper that she didn't dare name. His carefully constructed walls were cracking, showing glimpses of the man beneath the monster. "Luca," she whispered, reaching for him. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. The conflict in his expression was clear. He wanted her, but he wasn't ready to let himself have her. Not yet. Not when it meant losing the control he'd spent years perfecting. Sarah studied her reflection in the mirror, smoothing down the black dress Luca had chosen for her. The fabric hugged her curves, making her look dangerous and elegant at the same time. She hardly recognized herself anymore. The frightened woman who'd texted a stranger for help seemed like a lifetime ago. A knock at her door made her turn. Luca stood there, dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit that made him look even more lethal than usual. His eyes darkened as they traveled over her, lingering on the way the dress dipped low in the back. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice rough. Since their kiss in the library, the tension between them had only grown thicker, more dangerous. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked, reaching for the diamond earrings he'd left in her room earlier. "Somewhere exclusive." He stepped behind her, his breath warm on her neck as he helped her with the clasp of a matching necklace. "I want you to see my world, Sarah. All of it." The ride was silent, tension crackling between them as the city lights blurred past. They pulled up to what looked like an abandoned warehouse, but Sarah knew better now. Nothing in Luca's world was what it seemed. Inside, the warehouse transformed into an opulent underground club. Crystal chandeliers hung from exposed beams, casting a warm glow over leather booths and marble tables. Beautiful people in designer clothes mingled with dangerous-looking men, all of them giving Luca respectful nods as he guided Sarah through the crowd. "Everyone here either works for me or wishes they did," Luca murmured in her ear, his hand possessive on her lower back. "This is where deals are made, alliances formed." Sarah noticed the subtle exchanges happening in dark corners, envelopes passing hands, whispered conversations. Some people wore masks, others didn't bother hiding their identities. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and expensive perfume. A man approached them, his smile too wide to be genuine. "Vieri, what a pleasure." His accent was Eastern European. His suit probably cost more than Sarah's old apartment. "And who is this lovely creature?" "She's mine," Luca said simply, but Sarah felt his body tense beside her. "That's all you need to know, Dmitri." Dmitri's eyes lingered on Sarah too long, making her skin crawl. "Of course. My apologies." He backed away, but not before giving Sarah another appreciative look. They made their way to a private booth overlooking the main floor. A waitress appeared immediately with champagne, her movements careful and practiced. Sarah watched as various people approached Luca, each interaction a careful dance of power and submission. "You run all this?" she asked, sipping her drink. "This and more." Luca's fingers traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "The club is just the surface. Below us are fighting rings, gambling rooms, places where the real business happens." As if on cue, a commotion broke out near the bar. Two men were squaring off, their argument getting heated. Sarah tensed, but Luca remained calm, merely nodding to one of his security men. "Watch," he instructed softly.
The situation was handled with brutal efficiency. Luca's men appeared from nowhere, surrounding the troublemakers. No words were exchanged. They simply disappeared into a back room. The crowd barely seemed to notice, continuing their conversations as if nothing had happened.
"Is that what happens to anyone who causes trouble?"
Sarah asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Luca turned to face her, his eyes intense. "I protect what's mine, Sarah, whether it's my business, my territory, or—" He broke off as someone approached their booth too quickly. The man was younger than most of the crowd, clearly drunk and either stupid or brave enough to ignore the warning looks from Luca's security. He reached for Sarah's arm. "Dance with me, beautiful." Before Luca could move, Sarah was already reacting. She twisted away from the man's grip, using the move her self-defense instructor had taught her after her attack. The man stumbled, surprise evident on his face as Sarah stood her ground. Luca was there in an instant, his presence radiating controlled violence. But Sarah noticed his approving glance at her reaction. She wasn't the same woman who'd needed saving that first night. She was learning to navigate this dangerous world on her own terms. The drunk man was quickly removed, and Sarah settled back into the booth, her heart pounding not from fear, but from adrenaline. Luca pulled her closer, his lips brushing her ear. "You're adapting well," he murmured, pride evident in his voice. Sarah watched the crowd below, seeing it now through new eyes. This wasn't just Luca's world anymore. She was becoming a part of it, learning its rules, its dangers. And somehow, that thought didn't terrify her as much as it should. Sarah woke to an empty bed, the sheets beside her cold. Luca's absence felt different this morning, heavier somehow. The mansion was quieter than usual, the usual bustle of guards and staff muted to whispers. She pulled on her silk robe, another of Luca's expensive gifts, and made her way downstairs. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, but the warmth didn't reach the chill that had settled in her bones. Something was wrong. Luca stood in his study, his back to the door as he stared out the window. His shoulders were rigid, tension visible in every line of his body. He didn't turn when she approached, didn't acknowledge her presence.
"Luca?"
She reached for him, but he stepped away. "Not now." His voice was cold, distant, reminiscent of their first meeting, but worse somehow. This wasn't just his usual guardedness. This was something else entirely. Sarah retreated, hurt but more concerned than anything. As she turned to leave, voices drifted from the hall. Luca's second-in-command, Marco, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. "The information could only have come from someone inside," Marco was saying. "The timing, the details. Romanov knew exactly when to move." Sarah pressed herself against the wall, listening. Her heart hammered in her chest. "Find them." Luca's voice was deadly quiet. I want names by tonight. Boss, if it's who we think, I don't care who it is. Nobody betrays me and lives. Sarah's breath caught. She'd seen Luca's dangerous side before, but this was different. This was personal. Heavy footsteps approached, and Sarah quickly moved away, pretending to be examining a painting when Marco emerged. He nodded to her, his face grim, before hurrying down the hall. Throughout the day, the mansion buzzed with tense energy. Men came and went, speaking in whispers. Luca remained in his study, taking calls and issuing orders. Sarah caught glimpses of him through the partially open door. He looked like a caged animal, dangerous and wounded. By evening, the tension had reached a breaking point. Sarah was in the library when she heard the crash from Luca's study, followed by cursing in Italian. She rushed to the door, finding Luca standing over his desk, papers scattered everywhere, a broken crystal tumbler at his feet. Luca? This time she didn't reach for him. Talk to me? He turned, and the raw pain in his eyes made her step back. Pack a bag, he said, his voice rough. We're leaving tonight. What? Why? Because someone I trusted has sold us out to Romanov. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare display of agitation. And until I know who, nobody is safe. Especially not you. But this isn't a discussion, Sarah. He crossed the room to her, gripping her arms. Romanov isn't just after my territory anymore. He's after everything I care about. His eyes bore into hers. Everything I love. The word hung between them, unacknowledged but heavy with meaning. Sarah's mind raced. Just days ago, she'd been a normal woman with a normal life. Now she was standing in a mafia boss's study, about to go on the run from his enemies. Sarah. Luca's voice softened slightly. I know this isn't the life you chose. If you want to leave, really leave, I'll make sure you're safe somewhere far from all this. The choice stretched before her like a chasm. On one side, her old life, safe, predictable, lonely. On the other, this dangerous new world with Luca, full of violence and betrayal, but also passion and protection. She looked up at him, seeing past the dangerous mafia boss to the man beneath. The man who'd saved her that first night, who'd shown her tenderness she'd never expected to find in his world. The man who was now offering her an escape, even though she could see it would destroy him to let her go. Sarah jerked awake to the sound of shattering glass. The mansion erupted in chaos. Heavy footsteps thundered down hallways, voices shouted in Italian, and beneath it all, she heard Luca's roar of rage. Her heart pounding, she threw on clothes and rushed downstairs. The scene that greeted her made her blood run cold. Luca stood in his study, surrounded by his men, his phone crushed in his grip. His face was a mask of barely contained fury, but his eyes held something she'd never seen before. Raw fear. What happened? She whispered. Marco, Luca's second in command, turned to her with grave eyes. They took Olivia. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Sweet, gentle Olivia. The one person who'd made her feel truly welcome in this dangerous world. The sister Luca had sworn to protect after failing her once before. Romanov. Luca's voice was deadly quiet. He took her from her apartment. Left this. He tossed a blood-stained note onto his desk. Sarah couldn't read the words, but she saw Romanov's elegant signature at the bottom. The security team? Marco asked. Dead. Luca's knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of his desk. All of them. Professional hit. They knew exactly when to strike. Sarah watched as Luca's composure cracked. His shoulders trembled with suppressed rage, and when he looked up, his eyes were darker than she'd ever seen them. This wasn't the controlled, calculating man she'd come to know. This was something else entirely. "Find her," he ordered, his voice like broken glass. "Turn this city upside down. I want every safe house, every warehouse, every fucking inch of Romanov's territory searched. Now." His men scattered, leaving only Sarah and Marco in the study. Luca began pacing, his movements tightly controlled but radiating violence. She could see him struggling to maintain his composure, to think strategically when everything in him wanted to tear the world apart. "This is my fault," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "I should have seen this coming. Should have had more security on her after the gala." Sarah approached him carefully. "Luca," he whirled on her, his eyes wild. Don't try to comfort me. My sister is out there with that monster because I let my guard down, because I was too focused on—" He cut himself off, but Sarah heard the unspoken words. He'd been focused on her, on protecting her, and now Olivia was paying the price. Marco's phone buzzed. "Boss, we've got movement at the docks. One of Romanov's ships just requested emergency clearance to leave port." Something in Luca's expression shifted. The fear didn't disappear, but it was overtaken by something darker, more primal. Sarah watched as he transformed before her eyes, becoming something else entirely. He moved to his desk, pulled out a gun, and checked the clip with mechanical precision. "Get the cars ready. Full tactical team. No one leaves that dock alive until we find her."
"Luca," Sarah tried again. "You need to think this through. What if it's a trap?"
"Of course it's a trap." His laugh was hollow, frightening. "Romanov wants me to come, wants to see me break when he hurts her." He looked at Sarah, and she barely recognized him. "So I'll go, and I'll show him exactly what happens when someone touches my family." Sarah felt cold fear crawl up her spine, not for herself, but for him. This version of Luca was capable of anything. The careful control he usually maintained was gone, replaced by a darkness she hadn't known existed. She'd thought she understood his capacity for violence before, but this was different. This was personal. She watched as he strapped on weapons with practiced ease, his movements fluid and deadly. His men filtered back in, similarly armed, awaiting his orders. The air in the mansion had changed, charged with lethal intent. Marco touched her arm gently. "Miss Sarah, perhaps you should wait upstairs." But Sarah couldn't move. She stood frozen, watching the man she'd come to care for transform into something that terrified her. Not because she feared him, but because she feared for him. For what this rage might cost him. For whether the man she knew would still exist after this was over. Sarah stood in Luca's study, watching him coordinate with his men. The room hummed with deadly purpose as he issued rapid-fire orders into multiple phones. Maps were spread across his mahogany desk, marked with red circles and cryptic notations. His fingers traced potential routes while his eyes burned with barely contained fury. "The ship's scheduled departure is in 3 hours, Marco reported, pointing to the harbor layout. "We've got eyes on all access points, but Romanov's men are everywhere. They're expecting us." Luca's jaw clenched. "Good, let them expect us. We'll hit them from multiple angles. Team 1 takes the north entrance. Team 2— "I want to help," Sarah interrupted, her voice steady despite the tension crackling through the room. The room fell silent. Luca's men exchanged worried glances, but Sarah held her ground. She'd spent too long being a victim, too long watching from the sidelines. Olivia wasn't just Luca's sister. She was the first person who'd shown Sarah real kindness in this dangerous world. Luca turned to her slowly, his expression unreadable. "No, absolutely not. You're staying here where it's safe."
"I know the layout of those docks," Sarah pressed on. "I worked there last summer, filing shipping manifests. I know every warehouse, every blind spot, every security camera placement."
Marco raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed, but Luca's face darkened. "This isn't a game, Sarah. These men are killers. They won't hesitate."
"You think I don't know that?" Sarah's voice rose. "I've seen what they're capable of. But Olivia is my friend too, and I'm tired of being protected, of being treated like I'm made of glass."
She stepped closer to the desk, her fingers brushing the map.
"Look, there's a service tunnel here that's not on any official blueprints. It connects to the main storage facility. The night security guards use it for smoke breaks. It's completely overlooked."
The men crowded around, studying where she pointed. Luca remained silent, but she could see his mind working, incorporating this new information into his plans.
"I'm not asking to be on the front lines," Sarah continued,
Softer now.
"but I can help coordinate from the command vehicle. I know things about that dock that could save lives, maybe even Olivia's life."
Luca braced his hands on the desk, his knuckles white. The struggle played across his face, his need to protect her warring with the tactical advantage she offered. Sarah held her breath, watching him.
"Boss?"
Marco interjected carefully.
"She has a point. That tunnel could be exactly what we need. A way in they won't expect."
Luca straightened, running a hand through his dark hair. When he looked at Sarah again, something had shifted in his eyes. "You stay in the command vehicle," he said finally, his voice hard. "2 guards with you at all times. If anything goes wrong, they get you out immediately. No arguments." Sarah nodded, relief and determination flooding through her.
"I understand."
"Marco, get her a vest and an earpiece. Brief her on the communications protocol." Luca's attention returned to the maps, but his body remained tense, hyper-aware of her presence. The next hour passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah absorbed everything they taught her about the communication systems, memorized code words, and helped mark additional security points on the maps. All the while, she felt Luca watching her, his gaze a physical weight on her skin. Finally, as the teams began moving out, Luca caught her arm. He pulled her aside, his grip gentle but firm.
"If anything happens to you," he started, then stopped, struggling with words he couldn't say. "I'll be careful," Sarah promised, reaching up to touch his face. "But this is my choice. You can't protect me forever."
His eyes searched hers, and for a moment the mask slipped. She saw his fear, his vulnerability, his need to keep her safe, warring with his respect for her strength. Then he leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers, and breathed deeply.
"Stay alive,"
he whispered, the words rough with emotion.
"That's an order."
Sarah's heart thundered in her chest as she nodded. They stood there for a moment longer, suspended in time, before Luca pulled away. The mask slipped back into place as he turned to lead his men into battle. But something had changed between them. She wasn't just someone to protect anymore. She was his partner, his equal in this dangerous dance they'd begun. The command vehicle hummed with tension. Banks of monitors cast a blue glow over Sarah's face as she tracked Luca's team through the dockyard's security feeds. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, switching between camera views while Marco coordinated with the strike teams. "Team 1, clear to proceed through the service tunnel," Sarah said into her headset, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Through the grainy footage, she watched Luca's men slip into the passage she'd told them about. Their movements were fluid, practiced, deadly. "Guards changing rotation in 30 seconds, she warned, watching another feed. "2 hostiles approaching the east corner."
Luca's voice crackled through the comm. "Copy that." His tone was ice-cold, focused. This wasn't the man who'd pressed his forehead to hers earlier. This was the Mafia boss, the killer. The first gunshot shattered the night. Sarah flinched, but kept her eyes on the screens. More shots followed, a brutal symphony of violence. Through the cameras, she watched Luca's men engage Romanov's guards. Bodies fell, blood stained the concrete. 3 hostiles, north entrance, Sarah reported, forcing herself to stay clinical. These weren't people dying. They were threats being eliminated. She had to believe that. Had to focus on Olivia. The violence escalated. On one screen, she watched Luca himself take down 2 men with terrifying efficiency. His movements were graceful, almost beautiful in their deadliness. Sarah's stomach churned, but she couldn't look away. "Movement in Warehouse 3, Marco barked. "Multiple signatures." Sarah switched feeds. "I see them. They're moving something. Someone." Her heart stopped. "It's Olivia. They're trying to relocate her." Luca's curse crackled through the comm. "Direction?" "Loading bay, west side. They have a van waiting." Sarah's fingers flew over the keyboard, bringing up more angles. 4 guards with her. She's conscious, but injured." The next few minutes were chaos. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions as Luca's teams converged on the warehouse. Sarah could barely keep track of all the movement, but she forced herself to focus, to be useful. "2 snipers on the roof," she called out, spotting the glint of rifle scopes. "Above the loading bay." The snipers never got a shot off. Luca's men were faster, more ruthless. Sarah watched them fall, their bodies hitting the ground with sickening thuds that she could almost feel through the silent footage. Then Luca himself appeared in the loading bay. Even through the grainy security feed, his rage was palpable. He moved like a force of nature, cutting through Romanov's men with terrifying precision. Each shot, each strike was calculated for maximum damage. Sarah's breath caught as she watched him work. This was his true nature, not the protective man who'd held her, but a killer who'd built his empire on blood and violence. Yet somehow, knowing this didn't diminish her feelings for him. If anything, it made them more complex, more real. "Olivia secured," Luca's voice came through, tight with controlled fury. "Medical team, move in." Sarah sagged with relief, but it was short-lived. On another monitor, she caught movement, a fresh wave of Romanov's men pouring in from multiple directions. "Luca, you've got incoming," she warned. "At least 15 hostiles, heavily armed." The response was immediate and devastating. Luca met the new threat head-on, his rage finally unleashed in full. Sarah watched, unable to look away, as he tore through Romanov's forces. This wasn't just about protecting his sister anymore. This was vengeance, pure and brutal. Violence that followed shook Sarah to her core. She'd seen Luca fight before, but this was different. This was primal, a side of him that he'd kept carefully controlled until now. Bodies fell around him like leaves in a storm, and still he pressed forward, his fury seemingly endless. Through it all, Sarah kept watching, kept reporting movements and threats. Her voice remained steady even as her hands shook. This was Luca's world in its purest form, beautiful and terrible, and impossible to ignore.
And she was part of it now, for better or worse. Gunfire erupted through the warehouse windows, shattering glass and splintering wood. Sarah dove behind a stack of crates, her heart hammering against her ribs. The acrid smell of cordite filled the air as bullets whizzed past. "Sarah!" Luca's voice cut through the chaos. He was moving toward her, his gun blazing as he took down 2 of Romanov's men. His face was a mask of controlled fury, but his eyes held something else when they met hers. Fear. More of Romanov's forces poured in through the broken windows. The warehouse, once their sanctuary for coordinating Olivia's rescue, had become a death trap. Sarah counted at least 20 heavily armed men, all focused on taking down Luca Vieri. "Stay down," Luca commanded, positioning himself between her and the incoming threat. His body moved with lethal grace as he engaged the attackers. One man fell, then another, but for each one that dropped, 2 more seemed to appear. Sarah wasn't helpless. She'd learned enough in her time with Luca to know how to handle herself. When a thug rounded the crates, she struck fast, driving her elbow into his throat. The gun she'd been carrying, the one Luca had insisted she learn to use, felt heavy in her hands as she fired. The recoil jarred her arms, but her shot found its mark. Romanov's voice echoed through the warehouse. "Give up, Vieri! You've lost everything!" He emerged from the shadows, flanked by his best men. His usual smooth charm was gone, replaced by naked hatred. "The only thing I'm going to lose," Luca snarled, "is the time it takes to kill you." The firefight intensified. Bullets riddled the crates around Sarah, sending splinters flying. She could smell blood now, mixed with gunpowder and fear. Luca's men were falling back, regrouping around their boss, but Romanov's forces had the advantage of numbers. Sarah saw the moment Luca made his decision. His eyes met hers briefly, and in that look was everything he'd never said. Then he moved, launching himself at Romanov's position with devastating force. His shots were precise, each one finding its mark. Bodies dropped as he carved a path through the enemy ranks. But Romanov wasn't finished. He pulled something from his jacket. A detonator. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized what was about to happen. "Luca! He's going to blow the building!" Luca didn't hesitate. He changed direction, charging straight at Romanov. Bullets tore into his shoulder, his leg, but he didn't slow. Sarah watched in horror and awe as he crashed into Romanov, sending them both sprawling. The detonator skittered across the floor. Sarah moved without thinking. She lunged for the device, snatching it away just as one of Romanov's men took aim at her. The shot never came. Luca's bullet found him first. The warehouse erupted into pure chaos. Luca and Romanov grappled on the ground, their fight more personal now. Gone were the guns. This was rage and hatred made flesh. Sarah had never seen Luca like this. All his careful control stripped away, leaving only the raw violence of a man protecting what was his. Romanov managed to land a solid hit, sending Luca staggering. But Luca recovered fast, his fist connecting with Romanov's jaw with bone-crushing force. Blood sprayed as Romanov went down. "You threaten my sister," Luca growled, landing another blow. "You threaten Sarah." Each word was punctuated with violence. "You thought you could take what's mine?" Sarah watched as Luca systematically dismantled his rival. It should have frightened her, seeing this side of him. Instead, she felt a strange mix of horror and understanding. This was who he was. Not just the protective man who'd saved her,
but also the ruthless boss who'd built an empire on violence. Romanov lay broken at Luka's feet, his once handsome face now a bloody mess. His empire, built on threats and manipulation, crumbled around him. Luka stood over him, victorious but bleeding from multiple wounds. His chest heaved with exertion, his knuckles raw and split. When he turned to look at Sarah, she saw past the violence to the man beneath. He was wounded, yes, but not just physically. The weight of everything he'd done, everything he was, showed in his eyes. But there was something else there, too. A desperate need for her understanding, her acceptance. Sarah's legs felt like lead as she stumbled through the warehouse's back exit. The metallic scent of blood clung to her clothes, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Behind her, she could still hear the echoes of gunfire and screams fading into silence. Everything she'd witnessed, the brutality, the raw violence of Luka's world, it was too much. The cool night air hit her face as she emerged into the alley. Her chest felt tight, constricting with each breath. She'd seen Luka for what he truly was tonight. Not just the controlled, protective man who'd saved her months ago, but the ruthless killer who'd torn through Romanov's men without hesitation. She made it halfway down the alley before his voice cut through the darkness. Sarah. Just one word, but it carried the weight of everything between them. She froze, her hand pressed against the rough brick wall for support. I can't, Luka. I can't do this anymore. His footsteps approached slowly, measured, like he was afraid she'd bolt if he moved too quickly. Maybe she would. Look at me, he said, his voice softer now, though still
carrying that edge of command that seemed bred into his bones. When she turned, she saw he was still covered in blood, his own and others. His expensive suit was torn, and fresh bruises were forming on his face. But his eyes were what stopped her heart. The usual icy control was gone, replaced by something raw and desperate. Don't leave. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, his hands coming up to frame her face. His touch was gentle, at odds with the violence she'd just witnessed. I can't let you walk away. Sarah tried to pull back, but her body betrayed her, leaning into his warmth instead. I saw what you did in there. You saw me protecting what's mine. His thumb traced her cheekbone, smearing a drop of blood there. Everything I did tonight was to keep you safe, to keep our family safe. Our family? The words came out as barely more than a whisper. Luka's eyes darkened. You're mine, Sarah. You have been since that first text message. I thought I could keep my distance, keep you separate from this part of my life. But I can't anymore. His voice roughened. I love you. God help me, but I do. The confession hung between them, heavy with all the things they'd never said. Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes. Luka. I know you're scared, he continued, his grip tightening slightly. I know this world terrifies you. But you're stronger than you think. You proved that tonight. Sarah remembered the weight of the gun in her hands, the way she'd fought alongside him without hesitation. But that was different. That was survival. I love you too, she admitted, the words tearing from her throat. But I can't live like this, surrounded by death and violence. I can't spend every day wondering if you'll come home alive, or if someone else will try to hurt us to get to you. Something shifted in Luka's expression, hope mixed with determination.
Then we'll leave. I'll change things, restructure everything. We can build something new, something legitimate. You'd do that? Leave everything you've built? His answer was immediate. For you? Yes. He pulled her closer until she could feel his heart beating against her chest. I've lived in darkness for so long, Sarah. You're the first light I've seen in years. I won't lose that. I won't lose you. She pressed her face into his chest, breathing in his scent beneath the blood and gunpowder. Promise me, she whispered. Promise me we can have a life without all this death. I promise. His lips brushed her temple, then her cheek, before finding her mouth in a desperate kiss. When he pulled back, his eyes were fierce with determination. We'll build something new together. Something better. Sarah stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of Luca's study, watching the first hints of dawn break across the skyline. Her body ached from the night's events, but it was nothing compared to the emotional exhaustion weighing on her heart. Behind her, heard Luca's measured footsteps approaching. He'd cleaned up, changed his clothes, but the intensity of his presence remained unchanged. I meant what I said outside, he spoke, his voice low and controlled. Every word of it. Sarah turned to face him, taking in his appearance. Even with his fresh suit and cleaned wounds, she could see the toll the night had taken on him. The usual sharp edges of his demeanor had softened, leaving something raw and honest in their place. I know you did, she replied, wrapping her arms around herself. But Luca, your whole life is here. Everything you've built. He closed the distance between them, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. The touch was gentle, at odds with the strength she knew those hands possessed. Nothing I've built matters more than you. The empire, the power, it's all meaningless if I lose you. Sarah leaned into his touch, despite her reservations. How would it even work? You can't just walk away from this life overnight. No, he admitted, his thumb tracing circles on her shoulder. It will take time. Months, maybe a year to transition everything properly. But I can start now. His eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. I'll begin moving our legitimate businesses to the forefront, scaling back the other operations. We'll do it right, make it clean. And your enemies? People like Romanov? A shadow crossed Luca's face. They won't be a problem anymore. What happened tonight made sure of that. His jaw tightened. But I need you to understand something, Sarah. Even when we transition away from this life, I'll never be completely clean. The things I've done, they're part of who I am. Sarah reached up, placing her hand against his cheek. I know who you are, Luca. I've seen all of you, the protector and the killer. I'm not asking you to become someone else. I'm asking for a future where we don't have to live surrounded by death. His expression softened, and he turned his face to press a kiss against her palm. You've changed everything for me. Before you, I never questioned this life. It was all I knew, all I thought I wanted. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her waist. But now I want more. I want mornings where I don't have to check for threats before leaving the house. I want to take you to dinner without armed guards. I want a life where our children won't have to inherit my sins. The mention of children made Sarah's heart skip. She looked up at him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. Children? A small smile tugged at his lips. Eventually, if that's what you want. His hand came up to cup her face. I want everything with you, Sarah. The whole future. Marriage, family, a legitimate legacy we can be proud of. Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. "I want that too," she whispered. "I love you, Luca. All of you." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, pouring all his promises into the gesture. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Then stay with me. Help me build this new life. I know it won't be easy, but together we can make it work." Sarah nodded, her fingers curling into the fabric of his suit. "Together," she agreed. The word felt right, felt like coming home, despite all the uncertainty ahead. Luca led her to the leather couch in his study, pulling her down beside him. As the sun continued to rise outside, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they sat in comfortable silence, both processing the magnitude of the changes they'd committed to. The autumn breeze rustled through the gardens of Luca's mansion, now their shared home. Sarah stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching leaves dance across the manicured lawn. 6 months had passed since that violent night when everything changed, and the transformation in their lives was remarkable. Luca had kept his word. Week by week, he'd dismantled the darker aspects of his empire, replacing them with legitimate ventures. The transition wasn't smooth. There were nights when he came home tense, his jaw clenched tight, but he never wavered from his promise to her. Sarah watched him now, seated at his desk across the room, poring over business documents. His shoulders weren't as rigid anymore, and the constant look of vigilance had softened. He still carried himself with authority, but there was a peace to him that hadn't existed before. "You're staring," he said without looking up, a smile playing at his lips. "I'm admiring," she corrected, moving toward him. "You look different when you're not plotting someone's downfall." He set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "Legitimate business is less exciting, but it has its rewards." His eyes followed her as she perched on the edge of his desk. "The board meeting today went well. We're expanding the tech division next month." Sarah smiled, remembering how skeptical his men had been when Luca first announced his plans to go legitimate. But he'd proved them wrong, turning his tactical brilliance to legal enterprises with surprising success. The transition had cost them some allies, but it had also earned them unexpected friends. "Olivia called earlier," Sarah said, running her fingers along the edge of his desk. "She's coming home next week. The therapy program in Switzerland really helped her." Luca's expression softened at the mention of his sister. "Good. She deserves peace after everything." He reached for Sarah's hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "So do you." The gesture was simple, but loaded with meaning. Sarah thought about how far they'd come, from that terrified text message to this moment. The nightmares still came sometimes, for both of them, but they were learning to face their demons together. "I have peace," she assured him, squeezing his hand. "Even with all the changes, all the challenges, I've never felt safer than I do with you." Luca stood, pulling her into his arms. The movement was fluid, practiced. They'd found their rhythm in these quiet moments. His hand came up to cup her face, his touch gentle despite the calluses that spoke of his violent past. "You changed everything," he murmured. "My whole life, I thought power meant control, meant never showing weakness." His other hand settled on her waist, drawing her closer. "But you showed me real strength, the kind that comes from letting someone in, from choosing to be better." Sarah leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent. "You did all the hard work yourself." I just believed in you." "You did more than believe," he countered. "You challenged me, stood up to me, made me want to be worthy of you." His eyes held hers, intense and vulnerable in a way only she got to see. "I wouldn't have survived losing you." The raw honesty in his voice made her heart ache. This was the real victory, not the legitimate businesses or the peaceful nights, but this ability to be truly vulnerable with each other, to trust without fear. "You'll never lose me," she promised, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. "We've built something real here, something worth fighting for." Luca's hand tightened on her waist, his eyes darkening with emotion. He looked at her with that quiet intensity that still made her breath catch even after all these months. "You're mine forever," he said, his voice low and certain. "And I'll never let you go." The morning sun streamed through the windows of their bedroom, casting a warm glow across Sarah's face as she stirred awake. Beside her, Luca was already up, his silhouette strong against the light as he stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear. Even now, months after leaving his darker life behind, old habits died hard. He still checked security reports first thing every morning. But there was a different air about him now. The tension that once ruled his shoulders had eased, replaced by a quiet confidence that came from choosing his path rather than being bound by obligation. He spoke softly into the phone, his voice carrying none of the sharp edges it once had. Sarah stretched, drawing his attention. His eyes softened as they met hers, that familiar warmth spreading across his features. He quickly ended his call and moved to sit beside her on the bed. "Good morning, Gata," he murmured, leaning down to kiss her forehead. His touch was gentle, yet still possessed that underlying strength that made her feel safe. "Sleep well?" "Better than ever," she replied, reaching up to run her fingers along his jaw. The stubble there reminded her of how far they'd come, this casual intimacy, this comfort in each other's presence, had been hard-won through months of healing and growth. Luca caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I was thinking," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her wrist. "Maybe it's time we took that trip we talked about. Just us, somewhere quiet. No business, no phones." Sarah sat up, the sheets pooling around her waist. "Really? You'd be willing to disconnect completely?" "For you? Anything." His smile held a hint of his old, dangerous charm, but now it was tempered with genuine warmth. "Besides, the company's stable. Olivia's doing well with her recovery. There's nothing holding us back anymore." The mention of his sister brought a smile to Sarah's face. Olivia had blossomed in recent months, finding her own strength after years of trauma. She'd even started counseling other survivors, turning her pain into purpose. It was a transformation that paralleled their own journey. "Where would we go?" Sarah asked, already imagining the possibilities. "Anywhere you want." Luca pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her with familiar security. "There's a villa in Tuscany, far from everything. Or we could go somewhere new, somewhere neither of us has history." Sarah leaned into his embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. It amazed her sometimes how this man, who once commanded an empire of shadows, could be so tender, so attentive to her needs. "I don't care where we go," she said honestly, "as long as I'm with you." Luca's chest rumbled with a low chuckle. "Always," he promised. "Though I have to warn you, old habits die hard. I'll still check every room, still watch every shadow." I wouldn't expect anything less, Sarah smiled, understanding that part of him would always be the protector, the guardian. It was woven into his DNA, this need to keep safe what he loved. The difference now was that he channeled it into love rather than violence. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. The world outside their window was bright with promise, a stark contrast to the dark nights that had brought them together. Their love had been forged in shadow, but it flourished in the light. You know, Sarah mused, a year ago, I never would have imagined this. Being here, being happy, being free. Luca tightened his hold on her. Neither did I. I thought I knew what power was, what strength meant. But you showed me something different. His voice grew serious. You showed me that real strength isn't about control or fear. It's about having the courage to change, to trust, to love. Sarah turned in his arms, meeting his gaze. The ice that once dominated his eyes had melted, replaced by warmth that never failed to make her heart skip. This was the man she'd always seen beneath the armor, strong yet gentle, fierce yet loving. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.